Very happy to have Doug Bickel here. Doug was actually extraordinarily gifted piano player, is now the chair of the piano department at the University of Miami. And it's great to have him back. He played at Snug Harbor last night. He'll be playing at the Sandbar tonight. And he has a lot to talk about today. And I'll let you introduce your friend, since I forgot your name already.
This is Dennis Marks. He is the Director of Bass Studies at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. Give him a round of applause. Dennis and I went to school together at the University of Miami, and we've been playing together off and on for, what, about 20 years?
Yeah,
something like that. And Dennis is very gifted. He's got perfect pitch, knows a million tunes, has great time, all that stuff that you'll see in a moment. Just for my own reference, I don't know any of you, I think. How many pianists do we have in the group? 3 pianists? How about guitar players? Cool. I wanted to rap a little bit today about comping. But first, I think maybe we'll play a tune in trio, and then we'll open up that discussion. So, and what's the drummer's name?
Chung Ho.
Chung Ho, nice to meet you. And what would you like to play, Dennis? Oh. What's the tones for Jones Bones? And make sure I can see the drummer you're ready. Eye contact is very important, obviously, in a trio, especially since we've never played together. And do you know this song by any chance? Chick Corea, Tones for Jones Bones?
I'm not sure.
You might know it. It's a, what is it, 32 bar form?
I think so.
32 bar form, but it's not A-B-A. You'll hear it.
Okay.
Still, let's see. Here. This. Okay, you can't move back anymore to your right, to your left? That's better. new to it, Mike? Yeah, it's a great tune to play on. It's actually 36 bars, I guess. But that's a few extra bars amongst friends. So, does anybody have any questions about what they just heard for any of us?
Yeah, I got a question. But the B flat major, you kind of you turn it into a minor chord, huh?
Which
was, I mean, when I would play that tune, it was like D major, G minor, or whatever.
Right.
And you went to B flat. Would you do that?
Yeah, I guess you're right, yeah.
It was cool. It's a nice change.
Well, just because that makes for parallel minor chords,
Oh, okay.
so I guess that's why I did that, but yeah.
Sounded cool.
Thanks.
How many bass players are there? How many bass players are there?
Bass players?
1, 2,
A couple.
3? Good.
Any questions about, like, let's say the two feel that he played in at the beginning? No? Okay. Do we have any horn players in here? Okay. I'd actually like to talk a little bit about comping, so how about one of the piano players want to come up and play too? The guinea pig? And you want to play? Yeah.
Got a guitar amp here now.
Got a guitar. Guitar players are licensed to play as
How
well.
about one of the bass players?
One of the bass players, if you like, yeah. Now, while they're getting set up, if you have a look over at the chalkboard, I wrote some terms on the board here. Talking about comping. And these are, to me, the 5 of the main factors when thinking about how to comp. When is it appropriate to comp? When is it necessary to comp? And when is it possible to edit a little bit what you're comping? The biggest problem that I see with compers generally is compers being a little bit late with the comp. And the reason for that usually is, at least in the case of piano players, I can't speak for guitar players, but sometimes we prioritize our voicing over being timing. Timing is the last term over there. In other words, being punctual with your comping so that you give the soloist the maximum possible time to hear the chord. And you might think that's overrated, and anyone that's playing a standard hopefully should know the standard, should be able to voice lead on their own. But the bottom line is, especially the functional chord qualities, by that I mean the 3rd and the 7th, even if you know the tune, sometimes just hearing it for that split second longer will help the soloist maybe to hear some stuff, some upper structure stuff, or to try some things maybe that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable doing if they get the feeling like, hey, I've got to make the changes, I've got to get over the bar line, because the person comping is not necessarily taking care of that. So one of the first exercises that I have my pianists do in regards to comping, and we'll use you as a guinea pig. What's a standard that you know real well? Or blues or whatever?
How about Stella? That's not right.
Stella? Everyone's cool with that? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to comp every chord a half beat early on the end of 4. Okay? What this does is this forces you to think about the harmony. It's kind of like when you're sight reading, when you're sight reading and you kind of have to scan ahead a little bit even though you're trying to read what's actually at the moment that you're supposed to be playing. But looking ahead for key changes or weird chords or weird accidentals and stuff. It's kind of like that harmonically. So this is going to teach you hopefully to think a little bit ahead and be ready to play the chord. I like to say be ready to play the chord on 4 of the 4th or 1 if it's in 2 chords per bar of the bar before you're supposed to play it. And that way you can choose to let it go by if you like, but hopefully your hands are already in the position where you're able to play the chord if you want to early. So let's try it about here.
You just count?
In a moment. But right now I just want you to play all early tones.
Just with no melody or anything?
Just yeah. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Excellent. So, in other words, you're going to be ahead of the game when it comes to being ready for your voicing. Now, what's your name?
Chip.
Chip?
Conley.
Nice to meet you. What I heard this time with you is I heard some doubling of notes in your voicings. So in other words, let's say that was the first chorus of someone's solo. Now, it's not all the time, but it is the truth that most soloists tend to start, usually, first of all, with this kind of solo shape. Now, sometimes you can start your solo hot. If I've just been playing with Steve and he's come off a real hot chorus or something, you know, maybe I want to start hot. You know, so that's an exception. That's maybe about 20% of the time, probably. Most solo shapes follow this. If this is somebody's first chorus of solo and you're playing these 7 or 8 note voicings, it's probably a bit too much. Now, I didn't specify that, so that's not, but I assume that this is something you're aware of, or sometimes 2 notes or 3 notes is plenty. The problem is we got these 2 hands here, and our instinct is, oh, I better do something with all 10 of these fingers or else I'm not trying. That's BS. Sometimes just 2 notes in the left hand, you know, it's okay. You can take a break. It's cool. Because what happens is not only in terms of register, which is the top term over there, but in terms of density. It just kind of handcuffs the soloist a little bit, either to generally play above where you're comping, because that's usually the way I think. I try to make sure that my top note of my voicing is either the same note or below wherever the soloist is playing. Now, if you're playing with a trombone player, that's a little bit problematic because they're down pretty low. So in that case, or bass player, exactly. So what do you do in that case? What's your mindset in the case of playing for a bass clef instrument?
That's like thin it out, or play like more open voice.
If you're going to try to still play below them, if somebody's playing around middle C or so, you know, 1 note can be cool, or 2 notes. Anything more than that tends to get a little bit muddy and tends to kind of get in the way. The other thing you have to think about is, what are the intervals within your voicing? If you're trying to play below somebody that's already playing low, you want to stay away from whole steps, half steps. You know, this voicing that we all love to play for C7, with that little crunch in there, you know, we all like that generally. But that can make a big difference if you compare the way this sounds to the way this sounds. Just taking that note out with this. It's just much more open. So some of us kind of fall into the trap, you know, 1/3 of music reproduction to me is about muscle memory. That's why we practice. If we're used to playing a voicing like that, you know, sometimes we have to deliberately think, okay, let me leave that out so that it's a little bit more open. And it's easy to just fall into the trap to kind of play what your muscles know. So why don't we have the horn players come up? So I personally have 2 rules in terms of voicing, personally. I try to follow. Number 1, very important, no flat 9 intervals in the voicing. Now, a flat 9 interval is different than a half step. When you go over the octave, sometimes because of the fundamental series, so a flat 9 interval is much more dissonant than a half step interval. And I try to avoid that. What's your name?
Daryl.
Daryl? What is the converse of a flat 9 interval? In other words, if you take those 2 notes and you flip them around the other way? Anybody? Major 7, which is still a little bit dissonant, but a lot less dissonant than a flat 9 interval. So that's my solution if I really like the notes I'm playing, but I don't want that to stand out. Now, rules are made to be broken, but you're going to be having a very dissonant sounding chord if you have a flat 9 interval. The other thing that I try to follow, and something you should work on, is I try not to double any notes in my voicing. One exception, the melody note or the top note. Now sometimes voicings have a melody component all of their own based on the top note that you're playing, you know. And us piano players hopefully are familiar with block style. You know what block style is? It's when you play the top note in octaves, and you fill it in with 1 or 2 notes in the middle, and then your left hand down here. So that's very valid. But other than that, I try hard not to double notes. Why do I do that? Well, when you play doubled notes, especially the octave, you are working harder to get a smaller sounding voicing, right? The fundamental series, the first overtone is the octave. And if you think of it like fractions canceling each other out, that's what happens when you double notes. So try not to double notes. Okay, you guys know Stella, or you want to play something else? Okay. So, what I want you to think about when we do this, when these guys are leaving space, that's the time where you should be a little bit more rhythmic with your comping. Shorter comps, maybe a little bit accented, when they leave you space. When they're playing and they're into their second or third or fourth course and they're playing a lot of scales and busy, I am thinking either about laying out or pads. You know, comping is a combination of pads and stabs, if you will, and most compers are pretty good with playing the stabs, but don't play nearly enough pads, in my opinion. Pads, especially if you're playing a neutral type voicing, can be supportive without interfering with what the soloists are doing. Okay? Think of it like a seesaw. When these guys are busy, I'm not doing much, at least rhythmically. When these guys leave a space, if they leave a space, do something, because if you don't do something, they're not going to leave you any more spaces. It's true. Subconsciously, if I feel like when I stop playing, it doesn't feel as good, I'm going to keep playing, because it feels good when I'm playing. If I know that I stop, and these guys are going to do something, I got to work less hard, and I look great. I mean, there could be no Herbie Hancock without Miles Davis. There's no doubt about that. So think about these concepts when you're comping, and let's see what you guys come up with.
Take the bridge, you can take the first step.
The head too?
Well, yeah, for the head.
Like that? Yeah, cool.
Great. So some very good comping, for sure. A couple of suggestions. First of all, for the trumpet player especially. When a trumpet player is up in his second or third octave, there are kind of physical implications to him playing way up there with no support underneath. I don't know how you feel about this. There were times when he was way up there, the little time that I sat down for a second, that's where you can utilize your block stuff in the right hand. Spread your hands apart a little bit to get a larger range of your voicing so that he feels comfortable up there. Think of it as if it was a big band situation. And do you do any arranging for big band?
I've maybe 2 times. Not a lot.
Working on it? Well, you probably wouldn't write your trumpets up and the ledger lines without the trombones underneath them. That's, that's one of the prime functions for the trombone section. Just kind of think of it that way as far as comping. Because if you don't support him when he goes up there, he's probably subconsciously or maybe consciously going to say, this is not worth all this work. I'm going to play down lower where I feel more comfortable, where I can play faster, where I can play without so much effort and not go up there again. When he goes up there, you need to be like, yeah, man, go. Let me get underneath you, Because he's certainly got that range. He certainly can go there. But that's a situation where you have an effect as to what he may or may not choose to try. The other thing is that the first soloist especially left you some spaces early on, and you definitely reacted, but it took you 2 or 3 beats or a bar. By the time it registered to you, okay, he's not playing, I can do something, he had already started playing his next phrase.
Right.
So part of that is if you are a little bit ahead when you're just what I would call maintenance comping, or when you're just kind of playing the chords for him, not necessarily reacting to him, you'll be ready to notice that he stopped playing a little bit quicker, I think. It got better as his solo went on. Of course, as his solo went on, he left less spaces, which is normal. That's always going to happen. Also, for the bass solo, if he's playing in the lower part of his range, I would think about maybe going up above him. So staying out of his frequency range, but still supporting him. And this was a situation, I think, where some more pads would have been helpful. And finally, I don't mean to pick on you, but this is a comping clinic. So piano players or guitar players, but especially piano players, you are always, I don't care if you're a sideman or the leader, in charge of intros and endings. I noticed that you let the bass player kind of dictate the ending, which is good, he's strong, but everybody is always looking to you, 90% of the time. Unless there's something written, or the leader said something, do it like this. So take charge. Better that you take charge and then you find out, okay, the leader wants to do something different, but take charge. Don't be passive in that situation. That will get you not called back again for a gig. Seriously. And comping will get you not called back for a gig. You can play the most burning solos in the world, and if you can't comp, there's a couple pianists in Miami who are great players, but I always get called for their gigs because, we like the way you comp. And it's an unsung thing, but it will make you money. Guaranteed.
I had a question. Going back to the bass solo, maybe we could, what do you consider the general consensus about whether you should comp for a bass solo, or whether, how do bass players feel about that?
Terrific question.
Huntington used to really hate if the person didn't comp for them, and then certain other people.
They get offended. Some bass players get offended. Why don't you comp? Dennis is kind of like that. Dennis always has said to me, why do you comp like you're walking on eggshells for the bass solo? I'm an instrument too. Why don't you comp for me like you comp for the sax solo? So that's the way I comp for Dennis. There's another bass player in town, actually from here. His name's Chuck Bergeron. he gets really pissed at me if I do anything but play half notes or whole notes. No rhythm. He said, let me determine the rhythm. Don't force the rhythm down my throat. But to answer your question, this is something that seems like it's totally common sense, but it's so often overlooked. Ask them. Most bass players are going to tell you, oh, I don't care, man, you know. But the very fact that you bothered to think about them and put them into your thoughts will mean a lot to them, you know. And so they're going to be much more comfortable with you. I mean, some cats, you know, you can be on a bus with them, on the road with them. The last thing they want to talk about is music. Okay. You know, but if you just simply ask, and if they say, whatever, at least you've made the effort, you know. But all bass players are different. Dennis, perhaps you could comment on this a little bit.
Yes, bass players are different. In fact, actually, I prefer pads quite often in my solo.
Okay,
so just
I'll make
keep
it
that in mind. But for a moment, just to get away from the comping thing, is the role of rhythmic responsibility. Every one of us is a drummer. Every single one of us is a drummer. And some of the things I just heard, it wasn't really the kind of time feel that I thought to be conducive to helping the group along. But what was your name?
Oliver.
Oliver. Very interesting ideas, very, searching. It's all great and everything, but when you were trying to play eighth notes, it really wasn't locking in. And really, we have to think more of drummers. We can't leave all the responsibility to the rhythm section and think that we can just float on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
We have to assume the responsibility. Okay? And your name was?
Mario.
Mario?
Yeah.
Much better groove-oriented playing, as far as what you were doing.
I got a little changes off of
But, right,
Yeah.
the note selection.
Yeah.
But I think that will definitely come as you learn more about harmony.
Yeah.
But I think that you're a little bit further along as far as assuming that kind of rhythmic responsibility. And even within the rhythm section itself, since you are Mr. Rhythm himself, I think that the intensity of the groove is very dependent on you. To build the intensity, you have to do things to interact with what the solo is doing to help generate intensity, instead of just kind of just laying down a groove and not really, it's a conversation. It's a two-way street. And you can't be afraid to play loud if need be, or very soft if need be, or nothing if need be. You've got to be willing to go all dynamic levels. Okay? And your name was?
Chip.
Chip. Also, the rhythmic responsibility thing, I think, applies to you as well, in that the start of your solo was very esoteric, very searching again, and then when you got into time, it didn't seem to really carry the same conviction that it did during the early part of the solo. So you have to be as comfortable playing burning Oscar Peterson, Joey Calderazzo time as you are in playing that searching Herbie stuff. You've got to be able to cover the entire gamut in order to be a complete player. And that goes for comping as well as soloing. And your name?
Jason.
Jason. Very good time feel on the walking lines and an excellent solo, I think we'll all agree. The only thing I would say is we have to start thinking beyond just using eighth notes for our solo.
Okay.
I think your solo was pretty much just about all eighth notes or laid back eighth notes. But you could do a lot of things with triplets, dotted quarters, some double timing, some half timing, some slides, and leaving space.
Okay.
So that otherwise, if you don't do that, sometimes it gets a little bit monotonous.
Okay.
If you just keep doing eighth notes. Okay? But I think you sound really, really excellent, though.
Thank you.
Overall. And one other thing I would point out to everybody is, as well as being all of us being drummers, we are all piano players as well, or some kind of chording instrument, meaning that everyone here should have the ability to play some kind of elementary piano, what's called arranger's piano, being able to comp a chord in the left hand. Not saying that everybody should be a great soloist on piano, but everybody should know the formula for doing an elementary jazz voicing on the left hand, meaning a third, a seventh, and some kind of color tone, or a 7 and 3, and some kind of color tone, being a 9, or 11, or 13. it will help your sense of harmony to be able to play this on the piano and comp through tunes that you're trying to play. And to this end, I believe that Professor Bickel has written a chart, looks like up there, regarding some of these formulas that I'm talking about. So, back to you.
So, part of the thing that we have to get over is pianists. When I was teaching here, I taught the jazz piano class for a while. And part of what we have to get over is what I call the brainwashing of the American music educational system. What I mean by that is that, I don't know about y'all, but the way I learned chords when I was 6, 7, 8, 10 years old was that you start with the root, and then you put a third above that, and then you put a third above that, and you put a third above that. But when I taught this jazz piano class, what I found out is if I said to someone, play the minor seventh of this chord, they couldn't figure it out unless they had a third, a fifth, and a seventh. So they would stack the thirds and figure it out that way. Of course, a minor seventh or a dominant seventh is simply a whole step below the root if you go the other way. The reason I mention that is in jazz, there are 2 chord tones, and only 2 chord tones in my opinion, and that's the third and the seventh. The fifth is not a chord tone, unlike what we've learned for 10 years of public school. So the fifth is definitely an important note in the chord, but I generally play the fifth, if I play a fifth, in the second octave above where the third and seventh is. Think of it like a house. Now, I don't know about here, but in the Northeast where I'm from, houses have basements and foundations. That's why they're still standing after 100 years. Okay? And then you have the house. You wouldn't build an attic to a house without the first floor, right? So, very important to me for chord construction that on the bottom of the chord, 95% of the time, is the third and the seventh, or the seventh and the third, depending on what order you play them in, without the fifth. The root, in my opinion, is also not a chord tone. This is controversial, but I feel that in jazz music is extremely contrapuntal, and that the bass function is, in my opinion, more melodic than it is functional. It might start on the root, but you might walk up to the ninth, to the third. So it's not the root for necessarily all 4 beats, you know. So you want to stay obviously away from playing roots in your left hand most of the time. There's some exceptions where it's helpful. But so I start with these 2 tones in my first octave. Above that, I have divided all of the possible color tones into 3 families of color tones. And this is mostly talking about dominant chords, because on minor chords and on major chords, you don't usually have altered ninths and flat 13s. You can, but it's more vanilla in that case. I have here the root as a color tone. It's part of the ninth family. Your plus 9, your natural 9, and your flat 9, your natural 9, and your plus 9. Obviously, we can play more than one of these at the same time. However, rule number 1 from our voicings, no flat 9 intervals. If we play a natural 9, we're not going to play a plus 9 in the next octave above it probably. However, and most of the time, when you see a flat 9, it's generally assumed that there is also a plus 9, because usually that comes from the diminished scale, and both notes are part of that scale. The 11th family, I put the 11 in parentheses. Does anyone know why? The flat 9 interval with the third, if it's a dominant chord or major chord. But there are times that we use the 11th as a chord tone. So what we'll do is we'll switch this guy and this guy. We'll put the 4th in the first octave, and we'll put the 3rd as a color tone above that. Could you play that for me? Or here, I got a piano here. So, instead of this, again, when I said what's the converse of a flat 9 interval, it becomes a major 7th, we got this. You know, I call that the Herbie voice, and it's very prevalent in his music. So it ends up being a rather consonant sounding chord with the same kind of function. I also have the sharp 11 and the 5th. Now the 5th can also belong to the 13th family. It depends how you approach it. If you approach it from below it's more appropriately in the 11th family. If you approach it from above, it's more part of the 13th family. So what I do when I'm learning, when I'm teaching beginning people how to play chords is, first of all, practice going through the fake book every day, something that you don't know, and playing just 3rd and 7th. You know, if you want to have something to do with the other hand, play the root in the left hand, 3rd and 7th in the right hand. Once I can do that, 3 notes. These 2 and 1 of these. Then 4 notes, pianists, 5 notes. The biggest problem I see with pianists is that they play generally too many notes, as I told you earlier. You know, get your 3-note voicings together, get your 4-note voicings together, because a lot of times that's really all you need. A lot of times we play these extra notes because that's where our hands just kind of go. You know. Is there any questions about this? Yes.
So what are you, like, for a 3-note voicing is like 3rd, 7th, and some other color terms?
Good question. If I'm playing a 3rd and I'm playing a 7th, probably I'm going to go for something in the 9th family, right? You got to be careful about spacing of your voicings. If there's anything more than like a 6th or 7th between notes, it tends to sound like 2 disconnected things being played at the same time rather than one voicing. You know, for pianists, and when playing solo piano, we have 3 jobs to do. The melody or the blowing or whatever the top note is, the root or the bass note or the walking bass, and then the chords. We got 2 hands. Now it started out in jazz piano history with a lot of stride. Root, chord. Right hand was free to blow. And actually in stride music, the right hand did a lot of block style things, reinforcing the harmony that was already being taken care of in the left hand. Myself, I'm not very good at stride. I don't know about Vic, you like playing? We all hate doing it. We all can do it. Sometimes I get called just to do that. Okay. It's important to be able to do everything, but it's not one of my areas of expertise for sure. I choose to do it like this. Melody, bass, chords, together, locked hand approach. So this allows me the ability, now what I had to work on is being able to play a melody convincingly with my weak fingers. You know, they don't go fast, and they also, these are twice as big as these. So if this is the melody, and these are the chords, God played a really cruel trick on us as pianists. Our hands would be better off like this than this, but we can't do that. So, you know, you have to practice things like playing these guys maybe twice as loud as you're playing these guys, just to make it balance. But very seldom do I get into the situation where I got to do 2 jobs with 1 hand. That's hard. Pianists should all work on being able to play a 10th in their left hand. How many people can play between C and E in their left hand? Good. Even if it's a stretch, even if it's not comfortable, if it's a stretch and it doesn't feel comfortable, you have to kind of make yourself do it, because your tendency is going to be not to try things that are uncomfortable, but you've got to do it. I tell some of my students, if you can't play a 10th, consider another line of work. Or make sure you have a bass player with you all the time, because that's a crucial part of playing jazz piano. Now, you might have to roll it, use a little pedal to connect it, but in solo piano, you know, otherwise, if you're just playing root and 7th and jumping all around, it loses some of its continuity. If you can play from a 10th, and then when the chord changes, usually by a 4th or a 5th, move it by a half step and make it a 7th, that'll serve you well.